In this episode, I speak with Dr. David Min, an oncologist that has special meaning in my life for how his personal touch and realness with me solved a mysterious neurological condition that took me to over 40 medical visits with more than 12 specialists. I asked him where he learned to practice medicine that left room for him to show up personally, the way he did with me. And I learned that his worldview was radically torn down by the day he rushed to ground zero on 9/11.
He said, "Dave, there's something happened downtown. You need to go help the emergency crew down there."
And tried to save firefighters that were seriously injured.
He was burned, and I was about to intubate him, and he said, "Well, Doc, I think I'm not going to make it. And I just got engaged, and I want to call my fiancee to let her know that it's been good," and he wanted to say goodbye. So I gave him my phone and I tubed him, and after that he passed away in about a couple of hours. And I came home. I slept like a baby, no problem. Back to my rotations, and I was doing ICU rotation about 3 months out. I was rounding and I started crying all of a sudden.
How he couldn't find the true meaning of his life until he was broken, despite having success by the world's standards. He shares about how his Korean family inherited a sense of fear of failing, so they were taught to always aim far higher than you actually need to get.
Ever since I was little, probably 9 years, 10 years, we always had a family quiet time, and it was at 4:30 a.m.
But how crushing this weight was to his soul. His oncology practice was struggling to be profitable until he let go of these pressures and decided to show up for people. Today, he's pioneered a system that not only is profitable, but provides free cancer treatment to the uninsured. And he has a message that anyone touched by the shadow of cancer needs to hear.
Number one, don't be afraid. Even though the world feels like it's all falling down on you.
I'm Keith Miller, and my podcast, The Soul of Life, is here to help you remember who you really are. I'll bring together people who have gotten off their treadmills. I'll have conversations with athletes, musicians, doctors, scientists, healers, and entrepreneurs to discuss the fascinating edges of our knowledge in neurobiology, psychology, and physics. This is The Soul of Life. This is my first episode of The Soul of Life, and I chose to speak with Dr. David Min. He is an oncologist hematologist that had a huge impact on my life because he broke through my denial that I had symptoms of depression. Now, I had seen Dr. Min, actually, if you look him up, it's Frederick Min. He goes by David. I had seen him in month number 1 of my diagnosis, when I first realized I had peripheral neuropathy. That's numbness in my feet, like I wasn't able to feel. The neurologist said, "Hey, you can't feel, you don't have sensation in your feet and your hands," like objectively, they found that. It was a little scary. I was convinced, since the doctors were telling me they could find no cause for that, in addition I had brain fog, kind of a lot of memory problems, I was convinced that it was coming from something called pernicious anemia. Basically a vitamin B12 or B group deficiency that can cause some of these symptoms because of the way it causes blood to not oxygenate fully. That's the anemia. Anyway, my everyday life was getting more and more compromised. I was dreading my work because it took so much effort just to do simple things. But I was like, this isn't depression. There's no way you can call this depression because I performed, I pushed myself athletically, I doubled down. I mean, I was doubling down on coffee as well, tripling down probably, which had zero effect, by the way. I was pushing through it, I was still performing, and I was thinking there's no way that you can be depressed and be functioning the way I am. I didn't feel depressed at all. I figured, well, if it is maybe in the family of depression, it must be it must be caused from some smoking gun. There's got to be something causing it, like leaky gut or celiac disease or mold exposure lactose intolerance. I mean, the list goes on and on. I won't go into all of it with you. But it was when I was about to hire a mold inspector to come to my house that I kind of realized, okay, I'm going out on the fringe here, because he started telling me about his, what I'm just going to call radio frequency conspiracy theory, RF causing all sorts of somatic problems, for which, by the way, I couldn't find any scientific basis. I began to wonder, am I going to be wearing tinfoil hat on my head and wandering the streets? So I walk into Dr. Min's office. My first visit, he says, "Hey, the tests look okay. No sign of cancer. This sounds like classic burnout, classic stress-related depression." And he tells me, look, the body just starts conserving energy. That's what depression is. It's not anything about, I mean, we think of it as sadness. We think of it as these things that basically you never want to think of yourself as, when in fact it's really just the brain saying, hey, I've got to conserve energy because I'm in stress mode so much. So as a result, when you do little things, simple tasks, it's going to feel like they're mountains you're moving around. That's what depression is to the brain. Well, I ignored him. Got him to go down another path with me, and he started injecting me with B12, because you can't really overdose on B12. It's pretty harmless to get too much. But eventually, Dr. Min said, no more injections. So, I found another doc and found a doctor somewhere else that would let me self-inject. I kind of felt like a junkie, but I didn't have a choice. Every day was a struggle. And after all, it wasn't my idea to self-inject B12. There's this thing called the Pernicious Anemia Society in the UK. You can look it up. It sort of crusades against standard testing for B12 deficiency, because they say that you can't overdose on B12, and therefore injection should be given based on symptoms, not potentially flawed blood tests, which they think are rampant. Now, I found no other doctors to corroborate that. And so I'm continuing to do this B12 self-injections in my stomach every day. I can laugh about it now. It wasn't a great place to be in. Finally, after seeing Dr. Min for 3 months, I went back to him. I said, can you do the test again now to see what my B12 levels are? Because there's got to be a difference now. And basically, he told me off. He said, you shouldn't be here. I mean, so picture this. I'm going in there to a chemo infusion center, and I'm sitting down right next to someone with metastatic stage 4 cancer to get my injection. Something didn't feel right to me either. But it was Dr. Min who took the first step. He said, hey, you, don't come back here. No more tests. And take the Zoloft with you. Now, he had prescribed Zoloft for me 3 months prior to this visit. I took it with me, got the prescription filled. It sat there. This time around, after 3 months, 3 more months, by the way, and this is like month number 9 or 12 of my symptoms, and 6 months into the carousel of doctors getting tests. But this time it finally sank in. Something about what Dr. Min did was very special. Now, after that visit, I worked closely with a colleague of mine who treated me with Zoloft and eventually a combination with Remission, which is also called mirtazapine, which for me at least is a miracle combination to address the insomnia that paradoxically shows up sometimes when you start taking SSRIs, even though they are helping other features of your symptoms. So it's worked out really well for me. I'm in rapid remission. Within a month, I was feeling, and I'm not kidding you, like I was 20 years old. My memory was sharp. I thought, well, this is what it's like to be 40-something. You just lose your memory. No. My memory came right back. My reflexes were faster and sharper. My working memory, particularly, was sharp. I began wondering, why the hell doesn't somebody just call these drugs performance enhancing, right? Then all the knuckleheads like me that are afraid of whatever we're afraid of by taking them, losing our edge or something, side effects, or whatever nonsense we come up with, we'll realize that, hey, your brain is just an energy mover. That's all it does. And these medicines simply help your brain do what it wants to do, which is move energy, electricity around better. They're not like, it's not cocaine. It's not giving you something your body doesn't do. It's literally just allowing your brain to move juice. So Dr. Min was kind of special for me. I wanted to talk to him to learn more about him, because if it wasn't for how he shared his own personal story about burning out as a resident, and about how matter-of-fact he was and being aggressive about using all the tools to treat depression, not just saying, well, maybe consider it, maybe go get it checked out. He said, no, look, I'm calling it, you've got this. If it wasn't for that, I could be still chasing my tail on a crusade to personally convince the medical establishment that their tech is flawed. So I'm pretty grateful for Dr. Min. It's not every day that you run into someone like him. When I was a kid, my favorite movie was George C. Scott's version of A Christmas Carol, right? I had it taped on VHS and watched it over and over and over again until I had every line memorized. There wasn't a lot on TV in our house. Now, there's other versions of this story, right? To me, nothing comes close to George C. Scott asking the ghost of Christmas future to show him some tenderness and some depth of feeling. I still watch it every year. And I swear, even though that movie was made in 1980-something, when Marley is dragging his chains through Ebenezer's bedroom, that ghost is in my living room, banging his way toward me. And I'm 9 years old, right? So it's those chains that Dr. Min talked about when he spoke on the Soul of Life show about his experiences running away from who he is because he was focused on achievement and success. Same for me. And by the way, he's attained a good measure of it. Just take a look at his resume. You'll see that David is one of the brightest bulbs in medicine that we have. David told me that he suffered PTSD after being at Ground Zero during 9/11, treating firefighters. That experience broke his chains. It broke down what he calls his box. And you'll hear him talk about this denial about being vulnerable, about needing help. And it broke the spell he had about seeing life as doing and seeing life as achieving. Before this, David didn't really want to help people that much. He was a science guy. He said he was kind of a jerk. He was definitely an introvert and he wanted to avoid seeing patients, but he specialized in drug development. He went on to work for Novartis, and because cancer treatment is kind of a person-centered thing, he ended up having to work with people. But it wasn't until the catastrophe of 9/11 and getting PTSD that he began to open himself up to actually seeing his patients and being with them. And he talks about his arrogance and his selfishness. Now, he uses terms, because he's a person of the Christian faith, he uses terms like sin and selfishness. And by the way, I want to let you know something about this. You're going to hear some language from my guests. Some of them are Christian, some of them are not. I'm not a Christian, but I'm going to be bringing people into your life on the Soul of Life that have a deep connection to their spirituality, no matter where they get it from. It doesn't matter whether you buy the Christian worldview. I mean, once a time I used to buy it, like hook, line, and sinker, I bought it all day, every day. And if you're one of those people like me that doesn't anymore, please trust me. I'm going to let my guests share their sources of faith, and I'm going to ask you to stay open to God in whatever form that may be. And if you're a bit bristled by the way I kind of think of myself seeing through the superstition and circus act of religion, I hope you can also trust me and stay open to there being more to your soul than any religion could ever teach you. You're going to hear David and I ask a common question. When did I first start losing connection to myself, to my soul? When did my soul start to die? And there's this question, like, we don't really talk about it, but it's implicit here. When did we gain the world? but lose our soul? I want to tell you that is not a scary question to ask. It's life-giving. The question is, how are you doing your life so that you're disassociating and detaching from who you really are? What are the things that cause you to have to do that and move far away from being who you really are? Because I think, after going through my experience, if you steer towards this gap of what you don't know, you end up finding your life. You find your soul. It's not something you have to go get. It's already there. It's in the gap. That's where life is. That's what's calling you and me. Having faith to steer into the unknown is where our soul is. So, take a breath, lean in, and steer into the darkness. You are not alone. We're there with you, David and me, and the others that I'll introduce you on this show are there with you. We're all in this with you. This is the soul of life. My guest today is Dr. David Min. He is a physician specializing in clinical hematology and oncology, which is blood chemistry related to pathology. And of course, oncology is the treatment of cancer. And he serves as a clinical professor of medicine at Georgetown University Medical School. He's been a lead investigator for cutting-edge novel treatments of cancer, and his clinical expertise includes a fellowship at the National Institutes of Health, NIH, here in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. Min is the recipient of numerous awards in medicine, including being named one of America's top oncologists. It's a real privilege to talk to you, Dr. Min. It's been a few months since I've actually seen you in your office. Welcome to the Soul of Life.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
it's so nice to see you.
When I saw you, I was seeing you because I had these weird neurological symptoms that were scary. They were disturbing. I went to a neurologist, and that was for me kind of a dead end, helpful in some ways, but I felt like I had to be sort of my own doctor. And you were open to seeing me, really, despite having no obvious signs of cancer. And I was lucky to see you with good health care. You shared yourself with me pretty early in our relationship. You told me about going through a crisis in your life that you thought looked a little bit like mine. I wasn't really open to hearing that. I didn't really hear it. But your something about your personal touch, maybe your confidence, kind of eventually telling me not to come back, kind of broke through the fog that I was in, literally in this sort of mental brain fog. And it was a pivotal moment for me, and that's why I wanted to speak to you today about this. And can you tell me a little bit about what it was like for me showing up in your office, telling you about these mysterious symptoms, asking you for injections, and you run a chemo clinic and you work with people really suffering from cancer.
Yeah, correct. So when I first saw you, you had many different signs. I was doing my residency up in New York. I was actually both ACLS and ATLS certified, because so that back then the doctors could still moonlight and make some extra money. So I was moonlighting, and so as you can see, for medicine doctor or internal medicine doctor to be certified for trauma, then I get extra, $50 per hour or something like that. So having said that, it's been long time now, and what happened was that while I was done with my moonlighting shift from emergency room, and I was coming home, and I got a page from my medical director, and I called him back, and he said, "Dave, there's something happened downtown. You need to go and help the emergency crew down there." And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "World Trade Center actually is collapsing." So that was a 9/11, and there are about 5 or 6. Well, there's 5 of us who actually went down, and I was doing all the traumas and intubations and so forth. And I remember most of them, but the thing is that one firefighter that I really remember is he was burned and I was about to intubate him, and he said, "Well, doc, I think I'm not going to make it." And I just got engaged, and I want to call my, my
Wow.
fiance to let her know
Mm.
that, it's been good, and he wanted to say goodbye, and so that
Wow.
she can move on. So I gave him my phone, and he called and he talked to them and said, he's not sure whether he can come out of it. And I tubed him, and after that, he passed away in about a couple of hours.
Mm.
He had a rapid decline, and so it was that gold, we call it golden moment, when they kind of shine a little bit. That's the time where he could, they could do the, last breath and so
Mm.
forth, and that's what happened. And think, and it ended, and I came home. I slept like a baby, no problem,
Mhm.
and I was doing back to my rotations, and I was doing ICU rotation about 3 months out, and all of a sudden, I was rounding, and I started crying. All of a sudden,
Mm.
I I was having I just didn't understand him, because I may look I'm actually an introvert.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not very outgoing, but many people think the opposite. But I'm really more introverted guy, so I really don't show too much of my emotions. Some people actually feel that I'm showing it, but they don't know that what I'm
Right.
really feeling,
So
right?
this must have
So
been really out of place for you having
oh,
this.
absolutely. So so then I talked to my director, and he said, Dave, you're the last person who has this. He diagnosed as a PTSD,
Yeah.
and he actually said, "How have you been?" And basically, I told him I wasn't sleeping very well. I had headaches, which did not go away, and it was many different things which I couldn't concentrate and so forth. And he said, "Well, Dave, you need to see someone."
Right.
So I saw my friend, who's actually a psychiatrist, and she said, "Well, you need to start some medicine." I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm not taking any medicine. This is PTSD. I can handle it." And he said, when she said, is that, well, you need to take this at least short course. You need to try this at least a few months and see how you do, because you need to help and to get over it, and also talk to psychotherapists and so forth. So that's what I did. I actually took about a month off during that time, and I'm a Christian, so I talked to my pastor. I chose my pastor as a psychotherapist, and I talked to him. And during that time, I have realized that things that I did not know before about myself. And that's where I kind of realized, I'm going to have to say, um, what's the purpose of my life, or meaning, something like that. So that's why when I saw you, I felt that um, you may be going through similar thing, which where you're highly charged
Mhm.
for a long period of time, and all of a sudden, you kind of like um, start having all these weird symptoms and so forth. And I thought this could be not just physics or physical findings, but also a mental finding. So
Right.
you have to connect those two, because your brain, actually, or mental, actually regulates a lot of our physical findings.
Or
And if we
presentation.
don't hit correct, and if we don't, we call it psychosomatic, but I believe this is something that we all should recognize, because if we don't take care of it, then your the suffering can continue on, or your disease or
Right.
physical
Right.
findings can
Yeah.
continue on.
I mean, it's amazing. I didn't know that about your story. It's the first time I'm hearing about the part about 9/11 and having that trauma. But it was clear to me. Later this sort of became clear to me. Like, I reflected or shared to other people about my experience with all the doctors I went to. I went to literally about a dozen or so, maybe more doctors, over 40 different medical visits, some of them invasive surgeries. And yours was my visit with you, even though you described yourself as an introvert, there was a connection. Something felt real about it, and that it makes perfect sense that you would have this experience. But I want to ask you about, maybe, to me, I use the word courage, and I don't know if that makes sense to you, to think of yourself that way, but that maybe for you it was just you were doing what came naturally to you. But the other doctors I went to didn't take those risks to share about themselves, and didn't open themselves up for that sort of touch. Um, and so I wonder about that, and I wonder what your sense is about um, the health field in particular, where we are focused. I mean, obviously you have to be focused on physical symptoms and separating the body into parts, and the brain is one part of that. But really, the brain is the body, right? Of course, it is the body. The mind is inside of the brain, so it is part of the body. And so, how do you what would you say to that, I guess? Why is it that most medical providers don't seem to have this, whatever we call this presence or this touch? Or what is it about practicing medicine?
Um, I have to say, doctoring has changed a lot past 20 years. Um, we had a lot of advances in treatment. For instance, I have many metastatic stage 4 cancer patients. They're not dying anymore. So we have many advances in medicines and diagnosis where they're able to cope with, and we're able to keep them alive without hurting their quality. But during that process, we have lost um, touch of healing, or mental healing has been lost as a, and that's mainly because um, it's very insurance driven nowadays.
Right, the managed
So,
care, right, drives everything,
correct,
right? Cost.
correct. So what happens is that all the stuff that we had to put into that few minutes that we have has to focus on medications, how you're doing, side effects, and what the plan of care
It's
is.
like you have to cut
And
right to that point.
correct. So a lot of my mental healing or listening to and so forth is pretty much non-existent,
Yeah.
because we have to we have to cram in a lot of those issues into it so that we can keep them safe.
Right.
So that same thing with a lot of neurologists, internal medicine doctors. Um, I believe everybody's kind of like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me tell you why I always, or I try to use, or I try to connect with our patients. Um, I told you that it was my pastor who actually told me, was my psychotherapist. And believe it or not, um, I really require some form of um, stimulus, or something that has to break me so that I could open up myself, because I was an introvert. So that opening, or I call it oscillation or vibration or something, some kind of stimulus, that could have been 9/11, right? That broke me. That broke my box where I had to open up and realize I have to think about myself, and I was able to get out of that box and look at myself from outside view to see what I'm doing and what am I gonna be as a doctor and so forth.
Right.
Because that's when I realized how um, arrogant I was and how sinful I was and how obnoxious I was.
Mm.
I don't think any of my friends will feel that way, but I found out as myself, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm such a bad person. I'm
Mm.
such a
Mm.
sinful guy.
So you
So I
mean
never realized.
yeah, the experience, the trauma, the stress of
Right.
that, the breaking you down you're kind of describing allowed you to become more reflective, you're kind of touching on kind of maybe shame. I think you're talking about like feeling remorse or feeling
Right.
like motivated to do something beyond or better than what you had
Right.
been.
Yeah. So if you call that as a suffering, because believe it or not, I actually decided to get into drug development because I couldn't see patients. I
Really?
don't know whether you saw that.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I don't share that story too much, only a few, but I can share it. It's not. So I didn't want to see patients.
Mm.
So I changed. I was gonna go become a cardiologist at Cornell. I got in and everything was all set up for fellowship. And I told my director I decided not to. I don't want to see any patients, and what should I do? And he actually said, "Why don't you go into drug development?" So what's funny is that most of the drug development back then was in oncology. So it's so odd. So I went to NIH and Georgetown. They had a combined fellowship for drug development and oncology. So I said, you know what? I'm going to do a drug development portion first. That's why I started at NIH,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
then I did the oncology later. So after that, believe it or not, I went to Novartis as a medical director to
Hmm.
make drugs, new
Right.
medication. Yeah.
Right.
So that's where I started, and then I was
So
actually traveling so much, and my wife
actually,
said, "Yeah,
yeah, trying to get away from people, right? Like trying to not help, not be directly involved in the suffering, maybe. As
correct." So that incident has changed me where I did not want to see patients because
right.
I thought I couldn't do very well
So
because
what
of
brought you
how
back?
it was my wife, my family.
Mm.
Uh, it was I was doing really well. Got promoted twice within a year. This is
Hmm.
crazy.
Mm.
But what happened was I was traveling so much. So and things didn't work out. So my wife, we all said, hey, why don't we just go back to private practice? And this practice right now, um, it was started with me and my partner, and we started it. He actually needed some help, so I called him, and he said, "Well, come on, let's start."
Yeah.
So that's how I relocated in DC,
Hmm.
and believe it or not, we were suffering financially. It was
Hmm.
we were doing really bad, and I prayed and I promised my partner and said, "Hey, I'm going to be with you for the next 2 years, and if we don't turn around, then I think I may have to leave."
Yeah. Wow.
So that's promise. So, but I promised him I'll do my best.
Hmm.
But and we had a lot of competition. Believe it or not, this is a very competitive market,
Right. The business side of it,
and
people don't really realize this, but it's
oh
not
yeah.
easy to make money necessarily these days.
No, no, I'm sure you're very aware yourself. It's not very easy.
Right.
And what we realized is that we actually have to change ourselves or change our thinking as a um, servant for the patients. We
Mm.
have to serve the patient.
Mm.
We're not on top of them, we're with them.
With them.
So caring comes at the same level. It's not hierarchical where we tell patients what to do or whichever.
Mm.
So if we don't open up our patient's mind or have some trusting relationship, or if we don't know how to listen to our patients, then we'll never really heal or help them out.
Right.
So that's why, um, bottom line is, that's what really got me back in seeing clinical our patients and so forth.
Mm.
That's what really got me back,
Wow.
where
I
I
mean,
was able to have some courage to see patients.
let me just sort of summarize that back to you, because I think it's so significant. I really want people to hear this, that in fact you thought, I mean, in two different places in your career, David, you thought that it was more about doing medicine, doing or achieving something, or even making money, right? Which is not a bad goal to have for any of us, right? We have to make money. And you said actually you weren't able to succeed with a doing mindset. You had to somehow shift, and you didn't do it willingly. You actually broke down, and 9/11 obviously broke lots of people down and broke our country down. And that event actually showed you that you need to be more yourself and just
Mhm.
focus on being with people. And in fact, that's how you've become successful financially, right? I'm guessing, I'm hoping the story ends well, that you're doing better now.
We're doing very well. So that's what happened. But
Wow.
to me, it's not. Uh, it's kind of like my whole life. I don't know. I don't want to stereotype it, but I don't know whether you know any Korean patients or anybody, but we're very education is the main thing when you're growing up. And I'm actually a third generation Christian. My grandfather was a pastor,
Oh.
and what's funny is that he actually, I was born here in D.C. and he showed me. I went back and forth, and he showed me a dollar bill, the U.S. dollar bill, and he said, "The reason I like you were born in America is look at this dollar bill. What does it say?" And it says, "In God we trust." And he said that that's why I like your country. That's actually what he said. He's so funny, but he went through many wars. He went through 3 wars already,
Mm. Mhm.
so he knows the suffering. He's kind of like he was actually, who's the famous psychotherapist? Was in Auschwitz. Viktor
Viktor
Frankl,
Frankl. Yes.
right?
Yes.
So Viktor Frankl, he you know he actually, I believe he sees psychotherapy a little bit differently than other guys. And he was kind of like him because he went through all these wars, and he said, you need to, he actually raised my father by overestimating him.
Hmm. By
So,
expecting more from him than he.
correct, correct.
Yeah.
So he was always pushing him and telling him, you need to be at this level or whichever.
Right.
So same way, I was actually a very high achiever, and my folks were pushing me into it.
Yes.
So you can see why my box has become
Right.
full of stuff,
Right.
because all your life, you were always pushed into that high achieving
Right.
mode.
What we call
So
that
your purpose
in
is,
our yeah, we call that sort of like the generational burden. Like it's the axis of an entire culture sometimes, whether because if it's a culture that went through a Holocaust, for example, the axis of all of the families, many of the families are going to be tilted towards that scarcity and abuse or fear of it. And if
Yeah.
it shows up in the children, it shows up in how the children are raised and the pressure that's put on the children. So so
Exactly.
so you're saying you felt some of that from your Korean
Correct. Correct.
parents.
Yeah. Exactly. So so that's what happened, and that whole ground, even though my base core was, with your faith and everything, but I was never able to go back to the true meaning of my life
Right.
until I was actually um, broken, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that changed quite a bit, and that's how I was able to approach my patients. Is basically I was able to. You have to break that box, whatever we have it inside, so that in order for us to open up and able to listen to your
Right.
patients, so that they can open up.
Right. Right. I'm always of the opinion. I mean, you may feel some similarity to this as somebody who handles crises in people's lives. A cancer diagnosis is certainly a crisis. But people come to see me and people come to see you for kind of similar reasons. They've gotten stuck in a place where they can't get out of it themselves, and so they don't in some ways. Some of them have choice and kind of come before they're really stuck. But like I was coming to you, like I guess I was stuck in lots of different ways I didn't fully realize and understand, and you helped me kind of realize where I needed to focus. But um, it seems better if somehow people can have this realization that they have this box um, around them, this identity. I guess the old term we would say is the ego. Um, and the newer kind of psychology, what the practice that I work from is kind of we think of it as our protective parts. Our protective parts of our personality. They serve a very good purpose. They do very good things sometimes, often very good things, but they can easily get out of balance. And what would you say? I mean, how could we inspire others to sort of look at this box in their life and break down sooner rather than waiting for a cancer diagnosis or waiting for a depression diagnosis? Like for example, like medical students, what would you say? Like, could this be scripted somehow into training medical students or doctors or caregivers somehow to encourage them? What would have to happen, do you think?
Well, at Georgetown, we do have sort of those type of sessions or classes, and they reach out to older physicians who's like I get medical students where I have to teach them how our practices or how to achieve, but I mainly it's kind of like a mentoring program. Yeah. And I believe the mentoring program actually provides the best way of exposure to those students.
Hmm.
Um,
A personal kind of touch, right? To really kind of help process maybe
Absolutely.
where they're at personally in their relationship to healing.
Absolutely. So I do share my stories
Mm.
sometimes, or um, uh, so that, and I have to listen to where their background is, whether they become a doctor just because they like doctor, or actually, believe it or not, most of students that I see, they actually have a reason why they become a doctor, whether it's actually um, there was always some kind of stimulus that actually triggered that, whether how what whether the impact was great one or a bad one, or it
Hmm.
was more of a, it's all different. But I'm pretty sure as a doctor, just like how I went through, something will hit everybody at some point. Yeah.
Right.
And whether it was done before becoming a doctor or during a doctor, or so yeah. So what I try to do is I try to share my experience with them, so that they don't go through what I went through, or have some kind of insight where they know that they need to get some help,
Right.
or some of the things that where we have to be out of box, so that um, it doesn't take, for me, it took almost 6 years to come back to seeing patients.
Yeah, right. That's a long time, right? I mean, it really is. I mean, and I think you remind me of really how I started to reflect on, gosh, I mean, when did I first really start losing connection to myself? That can be a scary question, right? But like, I really wanted to think about that and wonder, it was years, I started noticing the symptoms,
Yeah.
the peripheral neuropathy and some of the memory loss, the symptoms were showing up. That's the tail end of this thing.
You're listening to the Soul of Life podcast with me, Keith Miller. Every week I bring you a new episode that hopefully inspires you to reflect more on who you are and who you want to be in this rapidly changing world. If this time we share together moves you somehow closer to who you are or lights up parts of you that have been unplugged, I want to hear from you. And please share the love. Take a moment to find the Soul of Life podcast in the social media where you hang out on iTunes, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, and let me know who you are.
That was the worst of it. But that disconnection started very early on, and what I think I want to encourage people through our conversation here is to realize it's not a very scary question to ask. In fact, it's a life-giving question to ask. How is their work, or how is their life, or their family, in some way, the role that they're playing in life, disassociating them from who they are, and to be able to ask those questions it's not scary. Like, I think it's actually helpful, and people will find good answers when they ask those questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Actually, some people have, most of our patients, they never ask those questions. They have never, because they're always in the box.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like, our mind is kind of like, there's an action, and then there's a response, and then time to response has become very short, where, because they're so in algorithm type of way of thinking,
Right.
they never been outside of that.
Right.
So same thing with our patient and doctor in relationship.
Mhm.
They're kind of like, hey, you know what, this doctor has to tell me the diagnosis so that they can treat me.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's kind of like that time to response, you may need some more time than to realize to get the right diagnosis. And it takes long hours of understanding before we jump into conclusion. So,
Right.
and
Right.
it could be a mental issue, physical issue. Yeah. So I think a lot of those training comes after your own experience, or after seeing thousands of patients.
Right.
And
Right. Right, right. And you're kind of speaking for people who are familiar with the mindfulness literature, the way the brain is able to kind of have the different wavelengths and modes that it's in, that you're kind of referring to the algorithmic mode as like what people would call the default mode
I see.
network, which is this sort of kind of default mode. It's really kind of like, really, like, we don't have to really be conscious doing any of that stuff. We can drive our car kind of in the default mode network. It's just sort of, we're just, it's routine, it's routinized. And yet you're speaking about, almost like you're saying that life actually happens, like cures or connections, um, um, fire and light up, not because of necessarily the routine, but from deviations in the routine, or exceptions or problems in the routine, where you start to try to realize, oh, there was a leap here, there's a gap, something's missing, and then we steer towards that, as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to stay with what I know. And I I wonder, I don't know about medical training per se, but you know, when you mentioned that your faith is important to you in your spiritual life, I wonder if that word faith has a place in scientific disciplines, right? I don't know what is the language. What do you know what I'm saying? Like talking about this idea that there is something beyond. Like the reason a scientist does an experiment is because there's some faith that there's something to find. It's not nothing out there. We just don't know. So why don't we, open up and find out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I I was always brought up this way, where you do. I've been doing quiet time, or it's called quiet time. It's where you do Bible verse, or you meditate and pray and think about it. So
Right.
believe it or not, ever since I was little, probably 9 years, 10 years, we always had a family quiet time, and it was at 4:30 a.m.
Wow.
4:30
That's
a.m.
ambitious.
I know, but that's how strict my family was.
Right.
And around, and we'll do every single day except on Sunday, because we go to church.
Because then you're in church.
Yeah, I know. So that's how my life has been for a long time. So you can tell, how even my folks, they're almost 80, and they're missionaries now. So they're in Cambodia, and they built the first music and art school, the
Wow.
university ever in Cambodia. They don't even have, they don't even have their scores for their anthem. So Cambodian anthem, they didn't have the scores. So they
Wow.
would actually play, or whichever, without the scores. It was all oral, and
Memorized.
nobody. Yeah, exactly. So my mother, my mom, she's a composer. So she actually made the first anthem score and
Wow.
gave it to the king.
That's amazing.
So you can imagine. I know.
Wow.
But there are missionaries there.
Yes.
And I told them, you can have a very comfortable life, and you'll do fine back in Korea or States. Why did you go to Cambodia? And they said, it's because of my faith. It's because of my purpose. It's because what God told me to do.
They were like called. They felt that connection to something
Right.
beyond that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I really believe that they're healthy. People are healthier if you have a purpose in your life. You have some kind of goal, long-term goal, or whichever, that, hey, this is something that is a comfortable place where we need to dedicate, and this is what I'm going to lead. I'm not forcing that everybody has to be religious or
Sure.
whichever, but to me, that kind of helped, because if we don't accept, or kind of like try to achieve what God has told you to do, it's kind of like, before I was trying to get into med school or MD PhD program or whichever, I had to achieve this much to get to this much. So my goal was kind of here, where where I'm going to be a doctor or whichever. I actually have to aim high in order for me to get there. As you know,
Right.
it's you'll never get to this high. You have to aim that high to get to there.
Yeah.
And before, it was like schooling or patients, or whichever, clinical trials, publications, and all that stuff in my life.
Doing things. Yeah.
Correct. And that's why I broke down,
Right.
because my foundation was so weak.
It was
Because by
about
the
doing.
time,
Yeah.
exactly, by the time I got everything,
Yeah.
then I realized this was not the purpose that I was doing.
Right.
I lost,
Right.
I lost that first love
Right.
when I said I wanted to be a doctor.
Right. Right.
So I think I truly believe my experience during that time, or 6 years, or whichever, has kind of provided me what the new purpose, or it was actually my first love,
Yeah.
but I found that first love, but it was something new for me.
Right.
And that's how I think uh, really helped me out of this, um, where I believe I'm definitely at a healthier place now mentally. Physically, I'm not so sure. but
There's always work
but
to do.
yeah, but mentally, I'm gonna have to say I'm a happier place
Yeah.
where I'm not as arrogant. I'm not as selfish or whichever.
Right. Right.
Um, our practice, just to just to let you know, I'm glad that I have a good partner. Now we have like 10 physicians. We hired a lot, but me and my partner went into patients without insurance.
Oh, wow. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So what happens is that Montgomery County or Maryland, we have a lot of uninsured population, believe it or not,
Hmm.
and mainly because of the illegal immigrants, or
Right.
undocumented people,
Yes.
and they get sick and they'll come to hospital,
Right.
and certain hospitals, they won't treat them. You go to Hopkins or Maryland or Georgetown, they won't even see them. If they
Hmm.
have no insurance, they just block everything.
Hmm.
And me and my partner were saying, but these people have cancer.
Yeah.
People have leukemia. We have to do something. So we do pro bono works,
Hmm.
where we see the patients and we try to get the treatments through our societies or pools or whatever we can.
Fundraising.
Yeah. Oh, not just fundraising. Fundraising doesn't work. They don't pay.
Mm.
It's too much. Because some of those, nobody pays them.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Some of them, well,
Yeah.
we have to go through our pools in either clinical trials or
Hmm.
certain companies where we have, hey, we'll do this, and can you help us? Or,
Right.
there's a
Right.
lot of those type of things. So we use all our sources to help them. It became quite a bit. So we had to write off a lot of thousands of dollars where
Hmm.
we're under. But as you know, we're a big organization. We have 45 oncologists.
Mm.
We
Hmm.
apply a lot. And what happened was they're all saying we're a capital group, and these two guys are seeing so many uninsured patients. They're bringing us down
Right.
in auto rates. And we kind of told them, listen, we're the one who's getting hit, writing off things. So don't worry about it. Financially, you'll be okay. We'll
Hmm.
take the cut. And as we get a lot of doctors in, thank God we were praying each time we were getting new partners. We
Wow.
were praying that they don't uh, disclaim or what we've been doing in our
Yes.
group.
Yes.
And thank God I said, listen, you may not make as much as this because we do a certain percentage of a lot of pro bono.
Hmm.
And thank God well, some of them, they didn't like it, but they
Yeah.
changed.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
those are, that's kind of like our missionary work
Right.
locally, where we are able to provide that care.
Right. Right.
So I think that's something I think I really think that God or will be saying, "Hey, David, you did a good job," because that's
Yeah.
something that it's not it's purely out of giving or love,
It's something bigger than you. It's not just about for you.
Absolutely,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
as you know, you don't have to be rich to give.
Right.
Giving
Right.
is a lot. Giving is at every uh, level of life where you can give.
Well,
So
giving usually ends up making it clear to us what we have, and and
absolutely,
and
uh,
sometimes we don't realize what we have, and that practice of giving is can be very therapeutic and very spiritual.
absolutely,
Even if we do it for the wrong reasons, sometimes it can be it can be good. But you're doing things, it sounds like, really for the right reasons, and really helping people. And I just appreciate your work. Is there anything that you would say to somebody who is newly diagnosed with cancer? I know we've spoken about my experience. I do not have cancer. I'm so grateful for that, and I cannot imagine. Um, I dealt with depression, and depression is highly treatable. That's a message I want people to hear from my story. And as long as you start naming it and calling it what it is and telling the truth about yourself, you can treat depression, and you can call it whatever you want after that. But um, I you're an oncologist and a hematologist, a specialist and a drug developer as well. What would you say to somebody who is newly diagnosed with cancer? What is it that you'd want them to hear?
I want to tell them, number one, don't be afraid. It's not the end of the world, and find a doctor that you can trust, and um, be optimistic. Always be optimistic, even even though it's the world feels like it's all falling down on you because of this cancer diagnosis. But I have to say, you can definitely beat this. It's not, it's a together thing. You don't have to be lonely. And if you have friends, family, and your healthcare doctors and nurses, they will all help you out so that you can actually beat this.
You can't really do
And
it alone, right? You really need to be able to open up to people around you to get through
absolutely
this.
not. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely not. And I believe initially, before you, it's one of those action and response I told you, I talked about. Their time to response
Yes.
becomes too quick, and people say, "Oh my gosh, I'm done. I'm just going to stay home and I'm not going to get any treatment."
Yeah.
That's something that you need to take time before you respond or make a decision.
Yeah.
Always leave all the options, hear everything before you make any decisions. So seek out, be optimistic, and eat well. Nutrition is a key. Eat well.
It really is.
I know, and sleep well. Don't try not to think too much about it.
Easier said than done, but that's what people like me and you are here to help for, and to just kind of be there and hold them through this, and people can get through it. Well, I want to thank you for holding me through this, and actually standing up to my obsession and denial, and kind of just telling me the truth, saying, "Hey, get out of here. You can't come back. No more tests. I've got other people to treat. Get out of here and go take your Zoloft." So that was a gift for me, and I'll never forget that. And I hope this is helpful for others too, to hear from you, Dr. David Min. And thank you for your time so much.
All right, thank you. So nice seeing you. You
You
look great.
too, as well. Thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to The Soul of Life. This is Keith Miller. Oh, and don't forget, please leave a thumbs up or a like for this episode wherever you're listening, so that others like you may find the soul of life. I mean, really, it's not every day you get to share the soul of life with someone. Okay, so you can post a comment or question on souloflifeshow.com. I'd love to hear from you, and please subscribe now to get the next episode. I look forward to sharing more of my soul of life with you.
I like it, and it's not harsh to my eardrum.
All right, I will go.